The conflict between Israelis and Palestinians in the Middle East has been known as the world's most intractable conflict. But what does that mean? Let's find out. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is the ongoing dispute between Palestinians and Israelis in the Levant region. The area of land in dispute runs from the Golan Heights to the Sinai Peninsula, and between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River. This argument has been going on for over 100 years and remains one of the most controversial disputes in the Middle East. So first, let's talk about political Zionism. The concept began in 1896 with Theodor Herzl and the document Der Judenstaat. Herzl argued that anti-Semitism in Europe and America could only be solved with creation of a Jewish nation-state. Herzl didn't choose a specific area of land, but later Zionists became enamored with the idea of biblical Israel, which at the time was a land of Mandate Palestine under British control. Fast forward to November 2, 1917. Arthur Balfour, British Foreign Secretary, sent a letter to Lord Rothschild, head of the British Zionist organization. This letter would later be known as the Balfour Declaration. It declared the British government's approval of a Jewish state in Mandate Palestine, but also noted that no actions taken in the creation of the state should hinder the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities. 30 years later, the UN General Assembly agreed on a partition plan to calm the tensions that had been rising between the Arab world and the Jewish population. The partition dedicated significant pieces of Palestinian land to a Jewish state. Depleted of resources from World War II, the British ended their mandate in May 1948. The afternoon the British forces left, World Zionist Organization leader David Ben-Gurion declared a State of Israel. The Arab-Israeli War of 1948, referred to as the Nakba, or the disaster, followed Israel's declaration of independence. Many Arab armies arrived in Israel to defend their Palestinian brothers, and in the midst of the devastation, approximately 726,000 Palestinian Arabs fled the conflict and were left homeless refugees. That was about 70% of the total Arab population in Palestine. By the end of the war, the Israelis had taken over way more land than had been granted by the partition plan. The Second Arab-Israeli War began and ended in 1976, when Israeli planes destroyed Egypt's air forces on the ground. This war was known as the Nakba, or the setback. This was the beginning of Israeli occupation of the Sinai Peninsula, the Golan Heights, the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem. These lands are considered occupied by international law and are in clear violation of the UN Charter. The land that was then held by the Israelis was 3 times larger than the land they had obtained in 1949. Israel has since withdrawn from the Sinai, but continues its occupation of the West Bank, Gaza, Golan Heights, and East Jerusalem. Palestinians lived under Israeli occupation and military rule for the next 50 years. In 1988, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the official representation of the Palestinian people, decided to unilaterally recognize the pre-1969 Israeli borders. This recognition relinquished 78% of the land that had been historic Palestine, but the occupation continued despite the PLO's recognition. In 1993, Yasser Arafat, leader of the PLO, and Yitzhak Rabin, Prime Minister of Israel, signed the Oslo Peace Accords. These accords envisioned a transitionary period during which Palestinians would be allowed limited self-government, followed by full Israeli withdrawal from the occupied territories, and the creation of a sovereign Palestine state. Since then, Israel embarked on a policy of settlement in these territories. In 1993, there are almost 300,000 settlers occupying Palestinian lands. At the end of 2015, there were 248 settlements in the West Bank alone, and there are also around 100 settlement outposts. These outposts are not officially recognized by the government, but they almost always have been established with Israeli governmental aid, and they displace the Palestinians who have been living there. Most estimates average over 800,000 Israeli settlers in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza today, and in 2004, the International Court of Justice stated that these settlements were illegal. And today, peace still hasn't been achieved. Approximately 5.6 million Palestinians now live within the West Bank, Gaza, and the State of Israel. Most Palestinians, however, live outside of these borders, having been forced to flee during the 2 wars, instability, and the occupation brought by the conflict. Even though their property is still in Palestine, Palestinians are not permitted to return by the Israeli government and must forfeit ownership of their belongings. There are over 5 million Palestinian refugees around the world, not including Palestinians who have been internally displaced. That's nearly 1/4 of the total refugees worldwide. But that's just a small part of it. So tune in to another episode for more about the conflict. In the meantime, you can look up Resolution 242, the right of return, and the occupation in Palestine. So see you next week on More About the Conflict.